House of EdTech, Episode 65. Support for this episode of the House of EdTech comes from summerpd.com. From the minds of Nate Nagel and Courtney Kofeld, are you a passionate educator looking to engage and empower your students with the help of technology? Does traditional PD leave you underwhelmed? Well, then you need to check out summerpd.com and sign up for their 10-week at-your-own-pace program that explores educational technologies like Google Classroom, apps, formative assessments, flipped classroom methods, and many more. Take advantage of their summer bundle, which is a limited-time promotion. You can get all 10 courses for $25 by using the promo code House of EdTech. By purchasing, you gain 24-hour, 7-day-a-week, 365-day access to the courses for professional development based on your schedule. For more information, go to summerpd.com and sign up today. And welcome back inside another episode of the House of EdTech podcast. No music once again 2 episodes in a row, so you know that the House of EdTech is still under construction. So here I am in the auxiliary House of EdTech studio, which is the garage here in New Jersey. I know I don't need to apologize, but I will say I'm sorry that I have not worked fast enough to reassemble the studio, but this episode will contain everything that you're used to except music and special effects. Obviously, the creative side will return once the office and studio have returned to regular working order. So if you're new to the podcast, first, welcome. Thank you for checking it out. I know that there are a number of new listeners who this may be your first episode or your second episode, but this episode is packed full of all the same stuff that I do attempt to provide on a regular basis. So we have the EdTech Thought, an EdTech Recommendation, and of course, the House of EdTech VIP. Since it is summer, I do try to keep the episodes a little bit shorter as I record them here in July of 2016. And that means that since I'm currently working on a project and spending time with the boys and doing family stuff, I'm not scheduling interviews to bring you full-blown hour-long episodes. So I hope that's okay. We will return to our regularly scheduled programming come September as I look to schedule some interviews and conversations for later in July and also in August to roll out the Mamma Jamma episodes to start the new school year. So first, some feedback. I need to welcome a new listener, Randy Fairfield. He is at Randy Fairfield on Twitter, and that's RandyFairfield, and he can be found also at his website, MrEdTech.com, and Mr. is spelled out, M-I-S-T-E-R, and he's a new listener to the podcast. He just tweeted me today as I record this to let me know that he found the podcast through the Google Play Music Store, where podcasts are available. So if you, like Randy, are on an Android device, you can listen to podcasts in the Google Play Music app, and you can just search for House of EdTech, and I will pop up. So that's actually what I do recommend you do if you are on an Android device, because that is the officially supported podcast catcher on Android. And it works out, and it works pretty cool. I use it on one of the Android tablets that I have when I do pick up an Android tablet here around the house. So welcome, Randy. I'm glad you found the podcast, and I'm glad you enjoy it. And thanks for coming aboard. Really appreciate it. Other audio feedback that I do have is still just going to have to stay in the queue. I have it, in my notes as to when I'm going to use it and who I got it from. I just don't have the means to assemble it the way I would want to when I normally create the episodes. So audio feedback will be forthcoming. I've spoken to Cassie Reeder, so she's been very cool to connect with, and she's enjoying the podcast as well. So thank you, Cassie, and I really appreciate connecting with you and everybody else who has, been connecting on Twitter. And I love the random messages on Voxer. So if you've never left a message for me on Voxer, please do. Again, my username is Mr. Nessie, MrNesi, and there's only one S in Nessie. So as I look to assemble future episodes, I do want to continue to put out this call to action for you and everybody else who listens, that if you have an EdTech question that you want me to answer here on the podcast, or an issue you want to raise and have me, banter on about, or, heck, if you want to come on, I would love to do, 5 or 10 minutes and talk about a topic. That would be fantastic. If you want to get me those different types of questions and topics, you can do it on Twitter. Just use the hashtag House of EdTech, because I have a great column set up in TweetDeck for everybody who uses the hashtag. And that makes it really easy for me to see your tweet and also to respond to you. Or there is also Voxer, again, Mr. Nessie. Or you can call the old feedback hotline, which is 732-903-4869. And as I sit here recording this, it just popped back into my head that in the last episode, number 64, that I said I would have a co-host for this episode, Derek Larson from Utah, former guest of the podcast. But again, because the studio isn't put back together, I did have to let Derek know that I just wasn't prepared to set up and record the conversation and, make that happen. So, Derek, my apologies again, but the joy of stumbling through your words late at night in the auxiliary House of EdTech. Derek will be on, hopefully, an episode by the end of the summer, sometime in August. I'm shooting to have the whole studio room done by the end of July. Basically, where that project stands now. Again, I'm just a super DIYer. My brother came over about a week ago as I record this, and we hung the drywall, the ceiling, new walls, and I am in the taping and mudding process of all the screw heads and joints and seams of the drywall. And then it'll be time to paint and sand and put the new built-in desk, which is still just a design in my head. I've been tweeting out pictures. I did a couple of periscopes about the project, so always be on the lookout for those. And I'm trying to, keep you guys in the loop. Where I have failed is to actually put pictures in the show notes for the last couple of episodes about the project. But definitely, if we're connected on Twitter, I'm definitely putting out pictures and images as I'm working and sending out shots of not quite paint drying, but, drywall that is hung and, spackled real nice. Because I love this stuff. It's good. But that'll come up a little bit later in this episode. Also want to thank my awesome supporters before we get into the EdTech thought and recommendation. My Patreon supporters, thank you to Peggy George, Mark Grindell, Jeff Herb, and Dan Gallagher. If you would like to become an awesome supporter of the podcast, just go to chrisnessie.com/awesome, and you can learn how you can do that through Patreon, which is an awesome way to show some support in a different way for the podcast. And now, again, as we go transitionless, let's get right into this episode's EdTech Thought. And this episode's EdTech Thought is called We're Teachers, We're Leaders, Now What? And this is also serving as an EdCamp Leader reflection. EdCamp Leader took place worldwide on July 11th, 2016. And if you're not familiar, EdCamp Leader, as I understand it, is the brainchild of Joe Mazza. And this is a multi-site EdCamp that takes place, and it's geared towards supervisors, administrators, superintendents, and teacher leaders. So when I arrived to the North Jersey EdCamp Leader location, good friend of mine, member of the Justice League, been on the podcast, the House of EdTech Takeover, AJ Bianco, was there as he's one of the organizers. And, we hadn't seen each other, so, we hugged it out. And he said that he was thinking about doing a session about, being a teacher, being a leader, and, now what do we do? So I said, AJ, can I do that with you? And let's do that. Let's make that session happen. It sounds like a great Q&A style session, just not a tech session, but a conversation session where obviously we didn't show up and have a presentation prepared. We just wanted to have a conversation and, go figure, we wanted to do it EdCamp style at an EdCamp. So some of the highlights we came away with in this conversation, and there were 3 superintendents, and basically everybody else was a supervisor, and AJ and I are, classroom level. And also Danny Kennis was there, also former guest of the show, and she is also still a classroom teacher. But basically some of the things that we came away with from the conversation is that districts should really start to look at the EdCamp model when they design their PD. And I can't agree with this. I can't agree with it more, because I believe that giving teachers control by empowering them and entrusting them. I mean, we're all college graduates. I don't know about you, but I don't think there are too many teachers that are not college graduates working in our school system, teaching kids and, doing what we do as educators. So we're all highly educated professionals. And too often and too many times, teachers don't have control over their professional development. And I can only speak from my experience here in New Jersey. We're required, or we used to be, or it's always changing, 100 hours of PD every 5 years, which breaks down to 20 hours of professional development in a school year. And your district will provide you with 20 hours of professional development. But is it the most worthwhile professional development? Is the professional development I've received over the years, has it always been relevant to what I've been teaching or doing? No. But my passions and my interest, that's what attracts me to things like EdCamp or Teach Meets, where I can, basically choose my own adventure. And, something like an EdCamp where you have like the rule of 2 feet. And if I don't like a session, I can get up and walk out. No harm, no foul. I can go start my own session. I can just go from session to session and learn as much as I can about whatever I want. And teachers want that. In my own district in New Brunswick, we got to experience that a little bit this year, where we had a mini conference. We put out a call for proposals, but the biggest component was not so much doing it EdCamp style and making up the sessions just before it happened, but we gave the teachers choice, and they got to pick the sessions they wanted to go to, and there was an abundance of choice. Whereas in the past, under old leadership, it was, here's 6 hours on boring topic A that may or may not apply to you, but we're going to make everybody sit through it. And when you're measuring seat time, you are measuring the wrong end of the learner, whether you are an adult or a student. So we shouldn't be measuring seat time. We should be measuring what you learn and what you do and how you apply it. And the most that's going to happen with that is, if I have control over it, or if you have control over what you're learning, you're going to make things happen in your classroom. So if you're an administrator, I plead with you to give your teachers choice and allow them to take ownership over their learning. We try to instill that in our students. Why aren't we doing that with our staff? One of the other high points that came out of it was the idea of the SDGP, or the Self-Directed Growth Plan. And I really latched on to this in terms of, from year to year here in New Jersey, I have to do a PDP or a professional development plan, or used to be a professional growth plan, or a professional improvement plan. And basically, with the SDGP, it's the idea of setting up an essential question for yourself and working towards being able to answer that question or have that knowledge or skill by the end of the school year. And there can be multiple parts to that, but it's self-directed. I get to choose what I want to learn, how I want to learn it, and when I'm going to learn it, and how deep I want to go with this new knowledge. And that's only going to benefit my kids. It's only going to benefit your students. Isn't that why we're here? Those are the 3 big points that came out of the conversation. I have to give a big shout out to AJ for being a teacher leader and wanting to start the conversation. So I'd like to continue that conversation anytime with you on Twitter. Let's keep the conversation going. I say that every episode. So get this episode in front of your district administrator. Question them. I'm not saying step out of line. I mean, yes, there are people out there who will tell you to, go against the grain, but ask questions. Ultimately, the answers will impact our kids, and that's why we're here. So you're a teacher, you're a leader. Now what are you going to do? And that's my EdTech thought. And now it's time for this episode's EdTech recommendation. And this kind of piggybacks on the EdTech thought and also what I talked about in terms of, the fact that I'm a DIYer and my house is basically a giant makerspace for me to tinker and build. I mean, I sit here in my garage and I see all, my tools and my scrap wood pile and just all the things I tinker with. And for this recommendation, it's not really a recommendation. Well, it sort of is. Think of what I'm about to say as more of a challenge. As I record this, it's the middle of summer. There is probably less on your plate now than during the school year. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to learn to do something new. And I want you to use YouTube to do it. And it's not really homework, but I want you to report back to me what you learned. Recently, as an example, my wife, Katelyn, at Kate Nessie on Twitter, follow her. She's awesome. I believe that. She learned how to tile a backsplash and added this great decorative feature to our first floor half bathroom. Now, I know how to do a lot of things. I know to shut off the electricity and the water when I do plumbing and electrical, mudding, taping, different woodworking projects. My go-to textbook is YouTube. One thing I don't know how to do is tile a backsplash. She basically got fed up with me not putting forth the effort to learn how to do that. But now granted, I've watched videos on it. It's just not something I have felt comfortable yet doing. My preconceived, my prejudice towards tiling is that it's messy. She didn't ruin the bathroom, so I applaud her. She's posted some pictures on Twitter and Instagram with this backsplash tile thing that she did, and it looks great. And again, I know how to do a lot of things, but tiling isn't one of them. Yet. Last summer, I redid the kitchen before the birth of Colton, who is coming up on a year, so that's exciting. But I'll save that for later in the summer. I want you to learn how to do something new. Anything. It could be professional. It could be personal. It could be DIY. It could be something simple to build for your backyard. I don't know. I want to give you choice. I want to make it self-directed for you. I'm just guiding you to YouTube. And I want you to share this new skill with me via Twitter or Voxer or as a comment on the show notes for this episode, which can be found at chrisnessie.com/65. And that's the number 65, as in episode 65, which is what you're listening to right now. So, do you accept my challenge? Well, I will find out. I'm going to learn how to do something new, and I'm going to report back to you before the end of the summer. I'll be honest, I don't know what it is yet, but I will commit to learning something new and sharing it here on the show in some way, shape, or form. So, do you accept my challenge? Will you take my recommendation? That's my question for you, and that is this episode's EdTech recommendation. And before we say goodbye, of course, I need to tell you who this episode's House of EdTech VIP is. This episode's House of EdTech VIP is Melissa Butler. Melissa is a SUNY Potsdam graduate with a bachelor's in elementary education and English and writing. She's also a graduate of Hofstra University with a master's degree in special education, as well as a degree in educational leadership, a master's from Montclair State University. She's currently a middle school English language arts teacher at South Orange Middle School in South Orange, New Jersey. She attends numerous ed camps and conferences. She's an avid EdTech user. She does amazing things with her students, one of which is her impressive implementation of Edmodo, and she's an avid Edmodo user and presenter, and I think you should connect with Melissa. She is on Twitter. Her handle is Angelina Shy, and that's ANGELINASHY, and she has a great Google site that I will link to in the show notes. I will say it here, but again, there'll be a link in the show notes, which is sites.google.com/site/Mrs. Teacher Butler. and that's going to be in the show notes. And congratulations to you, Melissa. You are a House of EdTech VIP. And that's going to do it for this abbreviated summer edition of the House of EdTech, sans special effects and music, but it will come back, I promise you. Thanks again to this episode's supporter, summerpd.com. Thank you for supporting this episode. And if you want to take advantage of their summer bundle and all the PD courses that they offer, you can use the promo code House of EdTech and save yourself $10 and get some great professional development. Keep the conversation going. Visit the website, chrisnessy.com, and go to chrisnessy.com/65 to get to the show notes for this episode. And the show notes are going to contain all the links and information that I shared with you today. I'd love to connect with you and hear your thoughts on the information and the resources that I shared in this and every episode. Doesn't matter when you listen. If you've got feedback, send it in and let me know what episode you listen to. I'm totally cool with that. On chrisnessy.com, just click Share Feedback, and that's going to give you my email address and all the different ways that you can connect with me. The fastest is, of course, Twitter. I am at Mr. Nessy, MRNESI, and again, use the House of EdTech hashtag. If you enjoyed this episode, and of course you did, I'd like you to do two things, as always. Number one, tell somebody else about the show. Word of mouth is the best way to share this and every podcast you love. It'll help every podcaster out, and that's what we want to do. Number two, rate and review the show on iTunes. Your rating and honest review is going to help keep the House of EdTech front and center for other educators to discover and enjoy. And you can also support the show through Patreon. Just go to chrisnessy.com/awesome, and you can find out how you can become an awesome supporter of the podcast. The next episode, number 66, is going to be released on July 31st, 2016. Until next time, thanks for joining me, and remember, using technology isn't difficult. Just give it a try. The House of EdTech is a proud member of the Education Podcast Network. The Education Podcast Network. Podcasts for educators. Podcasts by educators. For more great content, visit edupodcastnetwork.com.